Hello everyone, quick update on the Boxmotor truck modification. I'll show you what I'm doing here. So we've got this mid shaft fabricated right here, and what that will do is help us to get the proper gear ratio. So this is running about a 6:1 ratio, which is typically what I use with the 10-inch wheels. These are actually a little bigger than 10. I think these are like 11-inch. They're kind of the outliers on the railroad. Everything else is 10, but this car has 11s. But in any case, I've got a couple of bearing blocks right here, welded to some angles, and the motor will drive this sprocket, and then these two here will go out to the axle. So I'll have chain coming out here and a chain going to this axle, and then I've got this kind of crazy bracket here that I fabricated to hold the motor. So we'll get that put in and throw the motor up there and just kind of see what it looks like. And then once I have everything in position, then I'll start welding all these things in place. Okay, so we've got the motor mount C-clamped in here just so I can kind of see, line everything up, make sure that this is kind of an optimal placement for all these components, because I could in theory move things around a bit if I needed to. As it stands right now, everything looks pretty good. I got one of the axle sprockets here thrown on just so you can see how that's going to go. There'll be another one that will line up with this sprocket, so it'll go over here. Also, I've got this right here that's going to be a brake cylinder. So I'm going to add brakes to this truck, because right now only the current powered truck has a brake. So this guy will go kind of in here like this, and it'll push on some 2x4 blocks. That's what I use for brake shoes. So we'll get to that later. But I want to also show you how I do these sprockets for the axles. So these axles here, they've got to be well over 100 years old, and they're cast iron. They've been pressed on to the shaft. I assume that they heated them and then put them on, and then they shrunk, and that's how they're fit to the axle. I don't want to mess with trying to heat those things up because they're so old, brittle. If I break one of these, then I have to change all of the axles, because like I said, these wheels are a 11-inch wheel, and everything else that I have is a 10-inch wheel. So I'm trying to preserve all of these. So in order to get an axle or a sprocket on my axle, I do something that is rather unorthodox, and all of you purists, feel free to attack me in the comments below. I'm ready for it. But what I do here is I take the sprocket and I cut it in half. So I cut them right in the middle of the tooth there. Just cut them on my bandsaw, and then I put them together on the axle shaft. Now this one, I've just got the clamp on there to hold it on, but what I do is I cut some shims that are the same thickness as my saw blade, and I'll put them in here on both sides, and then put this hose clamp on here to hold everything together. I'll take my square, make sure that everything is square. I'll spin it, make sure that it's true, not wobbly in any way. And then I go through and I weld up the seams. So I'll weld on both sides here carefully so as not to heat it too much and warp it. But I weld those together, and then the sprocket gets welded to the axle shaft. So one of those things that's not really serviceable, like when this thing, something happens and the wheel breaks or whatever, and it just comes down to either getting a new sprocket, which is probably what I would do for the new axle, or try to cut these off, which that would probably make a mess. So One of those things, you know, been doing this for many years, and this way actually works just fine. The steeple cab, for instance, has these cut sprockets like this, and I've never had an issue with anything, as long as you put the shims in there so that your spacing between the teeth here is, you know, the same as it was before it was cut. There's really no issue. So the next step is I'll put this other sprocket on here, make sure that the chain's not going to interfere with anything, not going to hamper my brake setup in any way, and then I'll go through and square everything up and start welding things in place. I also want to point out the sprocket sizes here, just so I can get my gear ratio that I need. So this is the smallest sprocket I could get for this motor shaft, and then that will drive this larger mid sprocket, and then this shaft will drive the axle. So these are the smallest sprockets that I could get for this size of shaft, and then these are the largest sprockets that I could get to go on these the size of these wheels. Now, obviously we don't want it to hang down past where the axle is, and really this is a little bit larger sprocket than I probably should have used, because it does hang down below the skid bar. So if I have a derailment, you know, potentially this could contact something, you know, the rail or something. It was bad enough, but I've done this before, haven't ever had a problem. Derailments are very rare, so we're just gonna roll with it. But yes, that's how I do my gear ratios here. There's almost always a mid shaft. You just can't get a big enough sprocket due to the size of the wheels, so you have to make an intermediate gear step here with a mid shaft. So we've got the bearing blocks all properly bolted in now, and we've got a key stock in here in our mid shaft, and I've placed the other sprocket on the other axle. I have not welded those yet. And then I've got the motor mount all secured now. So I slotted these mount holes here, and then I added a chain tensioner bolt. So this is double nutted on both sides of this, and then there's a nut welded onto this angle iron, and this is just a locking nut. So once you get it where it's going to be set, then you can lock that down. So to tighten the chain, we just loosen up all these bolts right here, and then put a wrench on this guy and turn him, and it'll make this slide to tighten the chain from the motor. And then obviously lock this down and crank everything back down. She should be good. As far as tensioning the chains that go to the axles, the bearing blocks, these here are slotted, and so what I'll end up doing is putting a bolt, hang a bolt right here, and then you can just turn that and it'll push the bearing blocks to tighten the axle chains. All the bearing blocks are the same, so we'll just repeat that in 4 places. I've got the brake shoes just kind of sitting here right now. They're not mounted or anything. I'll put those in once I flip the truck back over. Right now I just got them sitting there so I can make sure that that's all going to fit. Not going to be no interference with anything. So yeah, we'll get some chains made up to go on here. Make sure that everything is free and clear of obstructions. There's nothing here that I can't see that's going to be an interference with anything. And then we'll take to putting the shims in these sprockets and welding them all up, welding them to the shaft, and then the hose clamps can go away. And also point out on this motor mount, I put some angles welded here. They're just little guide angles, so that way when the motor is tension, or the chain motor is tension, then it'll always slide straight. So we don't have to worry about trying to, you know, make sure that this thing goes straight when we tension it, because it's obviously going to always want to pull to the side once the chain tightens up. So what I did was I just went in here, made sure that this sprocket was square with this shaft, and then I put these little angles in here as guides. Got the chains installed here. Looks pretty good. No interference with anything, plenty of clearance. So now we'll get the sprocket halves welded together. What I'll do is I'll weld the seam, and then I'll put a dial indicator on here and turn the axle, make sure that there's not a lot of wobble in there. Try to correct what I can by tapping it square, although it should just stay pretty square. These are sized exactly for the axle, so I don't anticipate too much trouble there. We'll get those welded in place, and then secure all of the set screws, Loctite them, make sure everything's tight. Get the chains put back on, and then we'll flip this truck over and work on the brakes. About ready to weld one of the sprockets here. Just show you what I do, how unorthodox this is, but it works. It works. So, as you know, I cut these sprockets in half so I can put them on the axle shaft. And when I put them back together, then I use an old saw blade, so it's the same thickness as the one that was used to make the cut. Put that in there, got one there, got shims on this other side too. Kind of see the saw blade there. And then I clamp it together with some angle pieces. That makes sure that everything is square. And then what I'll do is go through and I'll put a little bit of weld here, and then we'll roll this around. We'll weld. I'll pull this shim out, put some weld on the other side. Once that is done, then I can take the clamp off that's kind of holding the halves together, and then I can go through and finish welding right here. You don't want to put too much weld out here, because the heat that you put into here can cause this sprocket to start getting some warp in it. So we just, you know, put a small bead on the gap. Don't have to fill the whole thing. And using the saw blade, make sure that we have our proper spacing between the teeth, just as if it was never cut. Got the sprockets all welded up. I've put little tack here, and then of course we've welded it to the shaft, so we're all good. Same thing over here, got this all welded up. And I put a dial indicator on here, and we've got about 30 thousandths of wobble in the sprocket, and that's just from the heat from the welding. Not a whole lot I could do about that, but there's a lot more than 30 thousandths slop in the chain side to side, so that's not going to cause any issue for us whatsoever. So now I'll get the chains all put back on, and we'll give it a little run by hand just to make sure everything is good, and then get all the set screws cranked down in the mid shaft and on the motor. Get some Loctite on those, and then we'll be ready to flip the truck over and work on the brakes. I did fab up this little bracket right here. This is my brake cylinder, and I've got this little bracket that bolts right onto the back of the cylinder, and it's going to go onto the wood block right here. So the cylinder will go like that. Then I just have to make another thing like this for the nose of the cylinder to go to the other brake shoe. Chains have been applied. Thing looks like it's running pretty smooth and true. Got our VFD hooked up here. We're gonna do a little test, see how everything looks and sounds running. So we'll start turning this on. And I did a little test trying to hold back the wheel here, and I can't do it. This thing is very powerful, so I feel a little bit better about this. So let's wind our speed up a little bit. Full speed. Pretty happy with how things are looking here. I did have this axle actually had almost 1/8 of an inch bend in it, so I had to take it out and straighten it a little bit. It's much truer now. It's within 30 thousandths. This axle was already pretty good. So yeah, I think the time has come now. We're going to flip this truck over and start working on the braking. I've got all the set screws Loctited and everything's well lubricated, so time to move forward. We're getting close to being done here. Got the braking and the chain tensioner installed for each wheel. So basically, for the chain tensioning, I put some threaded angle iron here welded to the frame, and I've got a jam nut right here. These are threaded. So whenever we need to tighten the chain, these bearing blocks have slots in them. So loosen these, loosen the jam nut, tighten this jacking screw, which pushes the bearing over, and then tighten these back down, tighten the jam nut, and the chain will be properly tensioned. So that is done. Got them over here as well. So all wheels have this, and generally what I do when I go to make an adjustment to the chain tension is I will measure the distance between the axles. So we'll do that, take a tape measure from here, run it over to here, and then we want it to be the same on both sides, so the wheel isn't, sitting in there crooked. So that has all been done already. As far as the braking goes, you can kind of see the cylinder hanging in here. And basically what I did is I've got this U bracket right here that's attached to the cylinder shaft. And then on this end, I've just got a backing plate attached to the back of the cylinder, a little spacer block right here. And and then it attaches to the brake shoes, which are just 2x4 blocks. There's a pivot point down here, which you can kind of see. This is my pivot point, and it's just a piece of, look at this one here. So it's just a piece of threaded angle that is welded to the bottom of the beam. And these brake shoes, this moves like this. So when the cylinder has air applied to it through this fitting, that will cause the cylinder to push the shaft out, which will spread these brake shoes and push them against the wheels. So what I'm going to do now is put this back up on blocks, and we will give it a final little run test, because I have tensioned the chains a little bit now that I've got these tensioners installed, and I just want to make sure for the final time that everything is good before we put this back under the box motor. At some point I'd like to throw a little paint on it too. So yeah, let's do a quick little run test and we'll finish up. All right, doing our final little run test here. Got my VFD set up, got a meter monitoring the input current to the VFD. I've got a air tank set up here with a regulator so I can apply some brake force. I'm going to wind this up a little bit. Seems to be about a quarter speed. We got 1.8 amps on our input. We start putting our brakes on. See our current going up as I apply more brakes. You can really see how out around the wheel is. That's all right. Give it a little more speed here. Take the brakes off. All right, very promising that I was unable to stall the motor with full brake applied. So I feel quite good about that. So next part is to take this truck out there and install it back under the box motor and try to take a ride. So hope everyone enjoyed watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.